Hello, welcome to the July maintainers meeting. And for today, I would like to try something new. And I ask all of you in our maintainers channel, what should we discuss? And I got a response for Dimitris, and he would like to discuss feature parity with LoopBack 3, and in particular, model validation in or at ORM level. So how to define additional validation functions, custom validation functions to be executed before the data is stored in a database. And then he would also like to discuss ACLs, access control lists, which in LoopBack 3 made it easy to implement security policies like an owner role, which allows only owners to manipulate data. And the question is how to implement this in LoopBack 4. And I don't know where to start because Dimitris is not here. Maybe we can start with ACLs and authentication and authorization, because from what I remember, we have some solution for ACLs using Casbin. Could you perhaps chime in, Raymond or Jenny? I think you are familiar with that part.
Yeah, thank you, Mirza, for bringing that question. Yeah, that's a good question. We do have an example using the Caspian to implement the equivalent loopback 3 ACL in loopback 4. So I think our situation now is we have the choice, more flexible choices to leverage different third-party modules like Caspian or Zero to implement the access control in loopback 4. And some community user, I remember there is some community example repository that they also implement the ACL just using model relations, if I remember correctly. I mean, without using the third-party module, it's still depends on their requirements and their choice. So I think my point is in loopback 4, the access control, the implementation of access control is more flexible than loopback 3, because in loopback 3 we provide the implementation of ACL, and in loopback 4 we create tutorials and also some examples to show people how they can integrate with our authorization and authentication system to create their access control provider or say component. And if community users contribute more examples or choices, we can also add them in our documentation. So I think that's our current solution for having access control in the LoopBack 4 app. So maybe Raymond can add.
Yeah, Jenny, I was looking at the example project, and we supposed to have a tutorial as part of the migration guide.
Right.
I'm not sure if that's the case because the Markdown file seems to be very simple, and I'm not seeing any details. Maybe you can check if we have a tutorial to talk about that.
Yeah, we have a very detailed tutorial. Let me find the link. It's very, very detailed, but maybe it tells it talks about the access control from the view of migration. So it's a little bit different from implementing the access control from scratch, but we do have the tutorial.
Yeah, I just see it. Yeah.
Okay, well, that might be good enough. So I guess we can get back to Miklos on a Slack chat to give him pointers where to learn more about our current solution. and then see if there is anything else missing. I wonder, Rifa, do you have any opinions, or do you use authorization with LoopBack 4 in your projects? Rifa, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you have any opinion on this, since you are from the community, you have different experience than we.
Okay, so I can't really speak for Caspin per se, but from a quick skim of the documentation, I'm not too sure if anything has changed. But what I'm seeing is that on the authorization docs, there is a brief mention on using Caspin, and there is a pointer to the LoopBack shopping example. But I have not been able to find like an end-to-end tutorial on how to actually integrate Caspin. So maybe that is an area of concern where people may not fully understand how to actually integrate it.
Yeah, I think what's tricky is the walkthrough tutorial is listed on the migration guide, and it's not showing up on the tutorials. So maybe somehow we need to update the sidebar to list that information from two different structures as well, I guess.
Yeah, it's mentioned in the README file of that example, so people know at least there is a tutorial.
Oh, okay. So it's under the migration guide.
It's under the migration guide.
Okay.
It's currently under the migration guide.
And also in the example itself, one of the links has not been updated. I think we moved the documentation from the example itself into the docs site folder, and we probably forgot to update that link. So that's why the link actually points to a very short version of the tutorial, which does not have any details.
Okay. So maybe that's an area of improvement for the docs to push this to, or at least make this more easily accessible. Maybe under as a sub page for authorization.
A couple places. So that's an interesting question because we have some tutorials that fit into multiple categories, right? Say initially we developed this tutorial for migration purpose to identify if there's any gaps between LoopBack 3 and LoopBack 4.
Right.
But now on the sidebar, we have a couple of sections which might be very useful to have at least have some mentioning or link to this tutorial. One is the tutorials top level section. The second one is authorization. Of course, it will stay within the migration guide as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, so maybe we should consider how to enable that kind of documentation use assurance so that when people come in from different passes, they can still see the availability of that tutorial.
I think I saw it from the Slack channel. Is that someone doesn't know about those because LoopBack 4 users, they're not doing any migration, so they never look at the migration related examples. I think that's because people may not be aware of those already available.
Yeah, because we initially developed the tutorial for the purpose to help migration, but I think the tutorial itself, it's really useful for new users as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe as a bonus, I'm not too sure if it's a good idea, but it may be good to have this authentication authorization part of one of the maybe to-do or to-do list tutorials. So it helps give new users a proper flow to understanding each component of LoopBack 4. Because my understanding is that the to-do tutorial is like an introduction to LoopBack 4.
Mm-hmm.
So putting the authorization, how to use authentication authorization could help users better understand and make the tutorial a little more complete also.
Yeah, we have a to-do JWT example, which is built on top of to-do. So maybe there's something that we can take a look at, so that like the application itself is very simple, but then how you can add the authentication and also authorization layer on top of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we need to find the right balance between making the to-do tutorial too complex, because if you are new to the framework, you might get overwhelmed by all the different models we will need to set up for authorization and authentication. So maybe it's better to keep to-do just a small to-do. And then, as Diana mentioned, create another tutorial building on top of to-do and adding authentication and authorization.
Okay, I see. One thing I also noticed while browsing the docs is that on the authentication tab, there is the GWT, adding GWT to to-do tutorial.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if that should be maybe under tutorials also instead of under authentication.
Probably.
I think it's already under the tutorials, and it's also part of the authentication section. So, Riva, do can you explain more about like where do you want to see the tutorial? I mean the authentication tutorial.
Okay, so my understanding is that the documentation has already it's segmented into how-to guides, tutorials, and whatnot. So I was thinking that because the link that I just sent on the chat, that documentation page is a tutorial and it's about the to-do. It tends to extend from the to-do tutorial. Then
Yeah.
would it be more suitable to be part of the to-do as a sub page of the to-do tutorial?
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, thank you for explaining this.
I think we should move this, just move this into a different part of our sidebar. I would put it after the to-do tutorial. Or maybe, as you said, it can be a new subsection into the tutorial. That's true.
Yeah, currently it's a separate tutorial.
Yeah. So our migration to the 4 quadrants is kind of in the middle, is a work in progress. So we started to move certain pages and parts of those pages into the new structure, but many existing or a lot of existing content is still in the old structure scattered around the place. We have follow-up user stories to improve that, but we are not there yet. So I think this is one of the cases where the content is in the old place and we need to update it to match the new structure.
Okay. I mean, just to continue to build up on it, since you're on the topic of authentication, is it the authentication and authorization pages are also duplicated, right?
Yeah,
One
I
is
found
under how-to guides and one is under integrate with infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we should
submitted a PR to remove the duplicate, but it's not released yet. So
and they are the same pages. I see we have 2 entries in the sidebar and they are pointing to the same page. So when you click on them, you have 2 entries in the sidebar highlighted, which is a bit weird. But if Jenny has fixed it, then we just need to publish a new release.
okay, next release you will see the change.
Oh, okay. So the change has already been put in place, though.
Yeah, I just realized the JWT authentication tutorial link is broken too under the tutorials.
That one is, I think that one should also be fixed after the new release. Because last time when I checked it, the link in our documentation folder is correct.
Okay.
But I don't know why somehow, yeah, it doesn't show the correct link on the current LoopBack.io website. So maybe after next release, this will be also fixed, hopefully.
Yeah, we can double check with master with docs preview to see if that has been fixed.
Okay, sure.
Cool. So
So,
my takeaway is that we need to improve documentation and make it easy for LoopBack for users to discover how to set up authorization rules. And one action item is to move authentication tutorial to tutorials to make it easier to discover. Then we have some broken links to fix. Is there anything else to do?
for documentation wise, I don't have anything else to add. But actually, I do want to talk about one thing. It's the recent work on the has many true. So has many true, from my understanding, it is enforced at the repository level. But I'm wondering, because this involves essentially two transactions on the is it like two statements on the database, would there be a way to make that atomic, or is it already atomic by design?
It isn't atomic.
So, like, by my knowledge, I don't think that's atomic by design. But we probably need to think about situations if the two related models are being persistent in the same relational database, which supports the database level transactions. Because in LoopBack, we allows you to relations across different databases, and some of the databases don't even support transaction. But at least for those that are being persistent in the same relational database, and if the starting point, the transactional context have been established in the options object, then somehow we should have at least see if that's a possibility to enable database level transactions for the different operations, I guess.
That's one
Right.
option.
Yeah.
Another option is to implement SQL join or to use SQL join to query related models. So instead of running multiple queries, we can create a single join query.
Yeah.
It only works again if all the models are being stored in the same relational database.
Yes, yes, of course.
Of course. So I think this kind of ties in well to one of those, I think one of those feature requests that has been bugging some people for a while, is that there doesn't seem to be a way to do transactions across models. Now, I mean, that's probably, as you mentioned, as Raymond has mentioned, because models can be across different databases, but this does raise a concern for some people who want to make a transaction that affects multiple tables. So I think that might be an area we might want to explore.
Yeah, so that's a really tricky situation. And recently we had a experimental release of the TypeOM integration. So from that angle, probably can remove some of the pressure from us. But the friction is, the TypeOM itself has a different way to handle relations, and the universal, relation types we support is not being implemented by the TypeOM integration. I'm not sure if that's going to happen or how much effort it takes.
Right. I mean, I understand there is the technical endeavor that comes with trying to allow Juggler to have this cross model transaction support. But I mean, unfortunately, I don't have much info. I'm not too knowledgeable on the juggler end because the documentation really isn't there at the moment. So I thought maybe it's a well, I do think type ORM can really quite a bit of pressure on us to actually focus on other features too. I think it's still important that as juggler being the supposedly loopbacks main ORM, I think it's important that we start, implementing some of these features, or at least modernize jugglers for TypeScript and for newer features. Otherwise, it may become a hog in the long run.
Right.
So from what I remember about the way how transactions work, you create a transaction by calling a method on data source, which gives you a transaction object, and then you pass the transaction object in options to all your database calls, to all your repository methods. So I think you can use the same transaction object when calling repository method for different models. Right? So at least in theory, it should be possible to use the same transaction to do queries on different models. But I think that's something we'll need to investigate and maybe write a small application to verify that it works.
Okay, sure.
If it does, then it would be the solution for running transactions with Juggler.
Yeah. If it works, then I think that would be great, because it brings the juggler ORM a step closer to being more usable in these kinds of use cases where you need to have atomic transactions. But yeah, I mean, that's just part of the bigger point that is what is the plans for so-called modernizing juggler? Because I understand juggler is a fork of a juggling DB, and then there were plans to modernize it a while back.
Yeah. So my point of view is that we must be careful about the modernization effort, because we cannot afford to invest 2 years into rewriting it from scratch as we did with LoopBack. So we need to find an incremental way how to make changes in small steps and keep releasing new features to our users. And the first two things I have on my mind is to allow connectors to be written as ES6 classes using async await. That should make it easier to, well, work in the connector code base, and also to start modernizing the connectors. And then the next steps are kind of open in my mind. I know that Draymond have some ideas and plans how to decouple the modeling part from the data access parts, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, so we had some discussion in the past, even had some initial PR to move the modeling part out of the repository package as a starting point. And of course, that's still welcome. And this one of the areas for improvements is to allow the definition of new types and the new type handlers to make the typing system more extensible. Similarly, for relations, I always have the idea like creating a new relation kind of extensible as well. And I agree with Microsoft, like one of the starting point to modernize the juggler support is really well define the contract between our data access layer against the connector itself. So Microsoft kind of thinking about starting with ES6 classes and async await. My personal opinion, probably it would be better off jumping to TypeScript directly. But net, we want to make the connector development more enjoyable and simplify, some of the work. And like in my opinion, like once we have well-established contract and using asynchronous way. So the creation of connectors will be much simpler. And we also need to consider things like life cycle, how we support connection, disconnection, or reconnection, as well as propagation of the context. For example, when you make a API call with some security context or with some tracing context, and you want to pass that all the way to another service through HTTP again, right? So you should have the ability to see what's coming, and you can control what's going out. So at least these kind of capabilities will make it easy to access the IOC container we already have in place. Today it's kind of tough. For example, if we bind a transaction, right, to the current request, and we are forced to kind of pass the transaction around. Like, in the future, we might have more flexibility to think about how to utilize the dependency injection to achieve that. But that's just some food for thought. So of course, in the data access layer, there are a lot of interesting features we can explore, and not all the available open source packages can solve all the problems. So it's really a tough area, but I definitely see some good potentials in such areas.
Okay, sure.
Maybe one important information is that there are so many things you would like to work on, so it can be challenging to prioritize what to invest our time into. And this whole Juggler modernization is a long-term project. So as a possible alternative, we are also investigating how can we integrate with TypeORM, Mongoose, and other ORMs. Because if it turns out that we can get this similar user experience when using TypeORM as when using Juggler, then maybe we don't need to rewrite Juggler, and we can instead move towards TypeORM. And then somebody else is improving the ORM layer for us.
Yeah,
But it's kind of my wishful thinking. I'm not sure if it will ever happen. It's something we are investigating right now. Go ahead.
I think the type ORM is actually a really good step onto diversifying on what LoopBack can run on. So I think that's really great. I mean, there's still some stuff that we need to work on type ORM, I noticed, but I think once we get, I mean, again, maybe it's wishful thinking, but I think once we get in that kind of integration with type ORM, then this could be a good, you could lower the barrier of entry for LoopBack 4, because many people are familiar with type ORM as it's used in other frameworks.
Yeah. And what we can also do is find a way how to allow people to mix type ORM repositories with existing Juggler repositories, for example, for model inclusions across databases. Because one of the big strengths of Juggler is that it supports different databases, SQL, NoSQL, also web services, and then we can do things like model inclusions across databases, which is probably not possible with TypeORM. And if we can find a way how to write kind of a glue that will allow TypeORM repositories to work with Juggler repositories, and then, for example, if we implement also Mongoose or TypeGoose support and provide this repository glue, then we can keep Juggler as like the legacy thing which works, and then start adding these specific ORMs like TypeORM and Mongoose, which are like more modern, and let them interoperate with each other so that people can move from Juggler to TypeORM incrementally. And then eventually, once everything, like once TypeORM and Mongoose are first-class citizen and everybody is happily using them, then we can say, okay, Juggler is being deprecated and everybody should move to those new options.
So in a way, we had the idea to really reduce the responsibility the juggler and make that just a collection of some extension points representing the commonly used data access patterns, right? And just sort of like define the interface for the behavior and allowing the different either different connectors or the different third-party integration modules to contribute behaviors into the overall picture and utilize our extensibility story to assemble them together. And so I think that's the ultimate vision we sort of have in mind, but it just take a while to get there. And maybe, in my opinion, it's very similar like how we built LoopBack 4 from web up. But of course, we have learned a lot and I have a solid foundation to start with, which will reduce the amount of efforts to allow that kind of situation. Yeah.
Okay, I see. So that's the general direction for LoopBack 4 is mainly to offload some of the responsibility of the LoopBack team. I mean, that's a fair point.
Yeah, so maybe it makes sense. Like we have some write up about some of the future thinking ideas, and try to get some feedback from the community and set the base for some of the community members to advance such areas instead of we being blocked by other areas and without any bandwidth to work on these interesting areas.
Okay, understood. But so that means, so that means down the line, you guys are probably going to. Is there any plans to abstract or decouple the LoopBack filter, like web builder and whatnot, into its own package? In that case.
Yeah, that's a saying consideration, like do some refactoring and really make the so-called like service provider interfaces or the common utilities into a package which does not have dependency on the juggler itself, right? Because in the extensibility model we typically have a common module kind of describe the common contracts and define the extension point to accept the contributions. Then the repository module today we have will becoming like a repository dash juggler in a sense, right?
So it just becomes the defining interface, just a common interface for maybe type ORM and juggler to communicate with one another. That's
right. Like as you said, like some of the common data structure for such as the filter object slash where object, right? Those are kind of independent of the juggler per se. If the third-party ORM integration choose to implement some of the capabilities, then we don't necessarily have to, tangle juggler together with that. So I definitely agree with you. We can do some cleanup there to really reflect the common non-juggler relevant pieces into some common modules.
And there was an effort in the past to extract filtering implementation from Juggler into a standalone package. It's called LoopBack-filters. But we copied the code from Juggler to the new package and didn't update Juggler to use the new package. So very soon those two places diverged. And now LoopBack-filters is way behind. And Juggler has many more bug fixes or improvements being done. And so I think it will make a lot of sense to do this properly and extract filter implementation into a package that will be used by in-memory connector, and that would allow other people to use it as well. Because, for example, one opportunity where to use filters is for filtering incoming messages in PubSub scenario, where you can say, I would like to listen to the following topic, but only for messages matching this var filter, which isn't possible to implement now because there is no LoopBack-filters package. So this could be in addition to what Raymond described. We can define the filter contract, the object, how it should look like. We can even write JSON schema to make validation easy. And then we can provide the default implementation, which can be used to filter in-memory records. And then we can also provide things like converting LoopBack filter object into, let's say, type ORM filter query, because type ORM has similar syntax, but there are subtle differences. And this could be a task for the type ORM integration layer, which I think is what Raymond meant.
I think that makes more sense now, right now, in the state of how LoopBack 4 is, especially since Juggler has mainly been abstracted away with the repository package. So it might be a lot easier now with less tech debt to maintain a separate filter package.
Yeah.
So a bit of a steering away a bit from from databases and ORMs. I have noticed, and I just want to acknowledge how I appreciate the amount of activity and community outreach that you guys have done in recent time with the blog articles, some of the videos, and also the replies on Slack. I think that's a great way to help engage the community and gain more people and to try out the framework, make it seem less intimidating. And I understand there's also another video coming out on the IBM Developer YouTube channel on 30th of July. So I think that's great.
Cool. Thank you for the praise. It's good to hear that our effort is making difference. And I would like also to briefly touch the second point raised by Mitsos, and that's by Dimitris, and that's the model validation at ORM level. And I think it's kind of related to what we discussed so far about the plans for Juggler and how to modernize it. And basically what Dimitris is looking for is how to implement custom validation at model level, which is not possible right now in LoopBack 4 because model metadata in LoopBack 4 doesn't cover custom validations.
Model validation.
So for example, in LoopBack 3, we have things like unique validation or, oh, I don't remember what all of them are. But basically you can define your own validation where you, basically a validation keyword, where you say this keyword should be validated using this function. Or I think there are also API where you can say this property should be valid. This property on this model class should be validated using this function. And I don't think we allow anything like that in LoopBack 4, or at least it's not like a first class well-documented feature.
I don't think we have that support yet. I mean, I know we have it at the Open API level, not necessarily at the model level. Though for things like unique, I have some doubts on how possible that is in the current setup, because right now, you need to involve the data store layer.
Yeah, and that's how it's implemented in LoopBack 3. When you say validate uniqueness off, then under the hood it will make a query to the database.
So it will actually put like I assume maybe a unique constraint.
No, it will. It has to support NoSQL databases as well. So basically, whenever you are changing a model instance, let's say you are saving my personal record and my email has to be unique. So what the validation rule does, it will fetch all emails from the database and make sure the only record with the same email is the record we are updating. And if we are creating a new record, then there must be no record with that value. It's even introducing a race condition, because if you send 2 requests creating the same a user with the same email and you send them fast enough, then there is a chance that they will run in the order where both will pass the validation. So this is not very robust.
Right. So it's kind of like a find one query, then a post.
Yeah. But then there are cases where your custom validation doesn't need to talk to the database, and it's still a valid case. So I don't know if you want to write, just a simple example, email validation. If you want to verify that something is an email, then I don't think it's possible to write a regular expression. So there is a function, there is a module called isEmail, which provides a function which you give a string and it tells you it's an email or it isn't. So we need a way how to say, for this model property in LoopBack 4, I would like to run this function to validate all values before they are passed to the database. And this is not possible at the moment.
Right, right. Maybe, I mean, since we're on the topic of models, just came out on my mind. I understand that we do have like the default FN property for thing for properties, but that only applies when creating new instances, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, yes, that's true.
So maybe that's so maybe it's an area we could add a feature for at least at the repository level or model level, sorry, to do on when updating the instance. Because like for example, created add and updated add columns, that may be useful in that case.
This is actually very tricky in LoopBack 3 because we have operations like create or update, where you want to create a new record if it doesn't exist, but if the data you have is representing a record that already exists, then you want to update that existing record, which means you don't know in advance whether the operation will end up being an update or a create.
So, because that's handled by Juggler, right?
It will be handled by the database. So there is a flavor of SQL statement where we can say, I think it's called create. Well, sorry, it's insert into database, then some data, and then there is on conflict, do something. There you specify when the record exists, then just do an update, don't create a new one. So we cannot tell in advance what will happen until the database actually does the work. And I think MongoDB has a similar operation. I think it's called upsert, where you give it the data and Mongo will decide whether a new record will be created or an existing will be updated. So there is no way how to tell in advance.
Right, right. But at least for LoopBack 4, we don't expose those kind of functions, those kind of...
Not yet, that's true. We don't.
Those kind of functions. But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was a mention to deprecate those functions, right? Or am I completely off the rails here?
I think we have intentionally kept this as an open question. So whether we want to implement these update or create, replace or create operations, or whether we will not, because there is a benefit in implementing them that you can implement upsert, update or insert in the same way for different databases, which might be a useful feature. But then there is a complexity involved. For example, you cannot tell in advance whether it will be an update or create. So I guess we need to make a trade-off, and we haven't decided yet.
Right, right. So, yeah, I mean, the difficulty is understood.
Yeah. So one option which is available in LoopBack 3 and in LoopBack 4 can be done through the legacy Juggler bridge is to leverage operation hooks. And in an operation, and we have operation hooks for things like accessing model, which is applied both for reads and writes. And then there is before save, after save, there is persist and load. And in these hooks, you can manipulate the data. So for example, you can update the updated add field. So this could be used for validation as well, but it's a bit cumbersome that it's not like here is a validator to call for this property and the framework takes care. It means you have to write your operation hook and understand like when and how to invoke your validation function. So it might be a workaround, but it might be a workaround which isn't very user friendly. So I think it's better to have a first-class solution for LoopBack 4. And personally, I see two kinds of validations. One is kind of like a well-known validation rules. For example, email. When you have an email, Juggler knows how to validate that a value as an email. Maybe certain databases are able to enforce email constraints as well. We can describe the field in OpenAPI as having an email constraint as well, maybe using a very simple regular expression that's very permissive, not strict enough, but at least it can catch 80% of wrong value, something along those lines. So this would be like a well-known validation keyword. And we can have like a min length, max length pattern using arbitrary regular expression, maybe other flavors. But this will get us only so far, and the next step is to allow arbitrary custom validation. And I think that's what Dimitris is looking for. But I'm not sure what to do about this right now. I think we all, or at least in our team, most of us are aware of this limitation. And now it's a matter of prioritization when we will start working on this. I mean, there's, as I said, there are so many things we have in our backlog that we have to pick which to work on first and which to defer.
Okay.
Raymond, do you have any more thoughts on validation of model properties?
Yeah, so like for instance level model properties, we kind of heavily rely on the AGV framework, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we allows you to extend AGV with customer keywords.
Mm-hmm.
So that if you say this is an email, right, you can define AGV function for the email keyword itself. Then whenever AGV does the validation, it invites you to have a function to come in.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel that's a pretty nice program model per se, because it allows you to extend the JSON schema vocabulary so that you can get additional constraints beyond the built-in ones.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that probably works well for the model instance level validation, but anything beyond the instance level, for example, the collection level, it's going to be different. Like, for example, to enforce the uniqueness of the email, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that actually should happen at the collection level.
Yep.
Which typically will involve some database operation, either it's a unique index or you have to do some database query to make sure it does not violate the constraint.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there is also a limitation of our current AGV-based implementation, and that this validation is implemented at REST layer level only. So if you write, let's say, a database migration script, which is invoked as part of npm run migrate, where you call repository APIs directly from JavaScript, or maybe if you write your test setup, where you are setting up your data before you execute your test, which usually is written using JavaScript APIs, then these validations are not executed because they don't go through the REST API validation layer. So my takeaway is that perhaps we should investigate how to implement these custom validation keywords at ORM level as well. So that you can
probably we need to have sort of like a validation service per se. And we could have the reference implementation based on AGV, and you should have the ability to config the validation service with some of the AGV options. So it just takes a little bit effort to reflect the code we already have, like the AGV provider factory or whatever things, so that and expose some like either service or some help method, which allows you to do the validation at different levels, and use that as part of the RAS validation as well. Yeah, I think that will give us the maximal flexibility.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
wondering if somebody is taking some notes so we don't forget about
I do.
the
I
ideas.
am. I'm
Okay.
taking them, but there will be a recording as well.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. It also makes me wonder how are other ORM frameworks like Type ORM and Mongoose approaching this, if they provide any custom validation rules. Because if they do, then it might be good to model or design our validation service to support those other programming models as well.
Yeah, so if I remember correctly, Mongoose or something like that, they have like validation hook, which allow you to set additional validations on the model class itself.
Oh, okay.
And we had that as part of LoopBack 3, but I don't think we have kind of redesign or implement that as part of LoopBack 4. But for LoopBack 4, probably there's some possibility because first of all, LoopBack 4 model classes allow decorators, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can actually use that to hook up some additional validators for either at the property level or at the model level. And when it comes to the validation service, when we try to validate instance against a model class, we can leverage this metadata to trigger additional behaviors as well.
Yep, that makes sense. We will also need to.
Class validator.
Yeah, and also the third-party modules like so-called class validator as well as the Joy. They have similar functions, right? Basically, you use some DSL like JavaScript calls to set up some rules. Then the validation will leverage this, functional programming or like some declarative approach to enforce validation.
Yep.
Yeah, I think validation itself probably deserves some like first-class attention because one of the benefits to use a framework is you get a lot of like validation out of box. Otherwise, you can just use the Express and then write things up by yourself.
Yeah.
And we do have a lot of knowledge about the data structure and the data typing and the constraint. So it definitely makes sense to think about, like say, maybe we have a LoopBack / validation kind of package. We don't have to build everything from ground up, but maybe starting with AGV as a base and extend that with additional capabilities. I think that would be good enough. And also thinking about how we allow all the third-party validation packages to be easily used in that context. And if people like Joy or Class Validator, and we'll see, maybe if they continue to use that kind of program model, but we can trigger the validation as part of the validation service application. That would be good as well. So I think we need to do some spike to see what's possible there.
Okay, makes sense.
Definitely, it would be a great improvement if we can reflect the validation out of the REST path.
One way is you can use the more decorators like HT and whatnot. I'm wondering if you can just leverage the Open API format attribute, since that one isn't actually fixed with like the specification doesn't fix it.
Yeah, that's already doable today with AGV. AGV also allows you to contribute customer formatters. And we have some examples or test cases kind of showing like to kind of check the formatting of some value. Okay. Yeah. And we actually document how to extend AJV in the context of REST by allowing the AJV customer keywords and the customer formatters to be contribute as a extension binding as well. So I guess the bottom line is we already have some goodies for validation as part of the REST package, but the usage of that capability should be made available to other situations too. Yeah.
Yep, makes sense. Okay, I'm putting down a note for myself to open GitHub issues to discuss this further and plan it for one of our milestones in the future. So that should be good. And we have run out of time. This meeting was scheduled for 60 minutes originally, and we haven't heard from everybody yet. It was me, Raymond, and Rifa. We spent a lot of time talking. So I would like at least one or two sentences from everybody else. Maybe if there is anything you would like to bring into our attention, or maybe something which you like, or something which should be changed, or anything else you would like to share with us.
As for me, I think you all have discussed whatever I had on my mind. I would like to add one thing. Our examples should be as simple as possible and should be focused on one particular aspect, and it shouldn't try to club too many examples in one app. Much like how we should create a function, one function to do one particular thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yep. Otherwise, then it makes it difficult for readers to understand which part of the big application is relevant to the sub-example they are reading, and which parts are wiring from the other parts which they are not interested. Yeah, that's a good comment.
So maybe we should have two different category examples. One is, as you guys said, it's like the examples which only demonstrate the feature you try to promote. Right? On the other hand, I think a lot of users are asking for more realistic examples to show how a couple of things actually work together to solve their problems. But I understand, it's going to be tough to have a lot of different combinations. Right? And in the past, we try to minimize the complexity in the examples directly, and also promote ideas like a shopping example as a raw model to do fairly close to real world kind of situations. And when I start to do some internal projects using LoopBack framework itself, I also realized there's some other interesting ideas we can, or best practice we can expose to our community members as well. But I just don't know what's the good balance here. For example, in my internal project, we start to allow people to create multiple sub applications, and each application will contribute some artifacts like a data source controller, and how we compose them together to have a meaningful, like a complex application. So those are, very common to real world development. So we probably need to look at both sides. Yeah, that's my point.
Makes sense. Jenny, can you go next?
Sure. Yeah, I totally agree with what Yapa just mentioned, and this is actually also what I was thinking about. Maybe we can, I mean, if the current access control example contains too too many other stuff, maybe we can have a simplified example for the for demoing the access control functionality only. But yeah, that's something we can discuss in the authorization documentation improvement specs story. There is one story there, and I'm going to take some time to investigate how we can improve it. And one more thing from me is recently I'm helping a community user. I think his name is Matt Khan. He's implementing the token refresh in the GWT authentication package. And I think that's a very awesome feature, and some other other community members also are also interested in it. So hopefully we can let that soon. And that's pretty much from me. Yeah, thanks.
That's great. So if I understand it correctly, Jenny, there are several people in the community asking for the feature of refreshing JWT tokens
Yes.
automatically. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Agnes, do you have anything on your mind?
Yeah, so except the example ones, I also noticed like some users, they mentioned like they found, for example, MongoDB connector has some bugs. And do we have any file to like to teach them or like to show how to debug? Because I found like it's very consuming if like one user asked me to debug this and the other user to ask me to debug another bug. I found it's very time consuming, and if they can like to spot where the bug is, it would be helpful for us.
Yeah, and it's usually easier for them to reproduce the bug because they have the application at their fingertips, while we need to build the reproduction case often. I know we have some documentation on troubleshooting in our docs. It's usually about how to set debug strings and maybe what debug strings to set, but I'm not sure if there is anything specific for troubleshooting connector problem or MongoDB connector in particular. So maybe that's something we can look into as well.
Yeah, and that's everything from me. Thank you.
Thanks. It's great. And Tom?
Hey, everybody. I've been helping Raymond on the internal project that he's referring to. And just a comment on LoopBack itself and our team and stuff. When we realize we need to extend LoopBack to solve a particular problem or to fix a bug, tiny bugs that we do find, the turnaround is very quick. Like Raymond puts together a fix, and our framework really, the LoopBack framework really seems to be an awesome tool to help with this internal project, with its capabilities and extensibility, and the process that our team goes through as an open source project. It's very quick turnaround for fixes. So I find that it's been a valuable tool for this internal project.
That's great to hear. Thanks, Dom. And Diana, you are the last one to speak. I think you didn't say much yet, did you?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think it's a good discussion. It would be good. It's good to hear from a different perspective, like from Viva, from the community, and also I know he has been helping a lot on the Slack channel triaging as well. It's good to have more ways that people can feedback the input from other people. Thanks.
And I guess that's it. Thank you for joining this month's meeting, and see you next month. Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.